At her own wedding, the bride threw wine straight into her father's face. The guests froze. The band stopped mid-chord. But instead of shouting back, he simply dabbed his cheek with a napkin and said, "It's your day, baby. I won't argue." Then he walked out of the hall, leaving silence thicker than the spill on his vest. No one knew that the real fight wouldn't happen on that dance floor, but in county offices, notarized letters, and quiet signatures, where a father would reclaim both his dignity and his home. Vernon Tate had always done things the quiet way. At 63, the retired postal supervisor still rose before the sun, drank his coffee black, and polished his shoes until they could hold the day's reflection. His Memphis bungalow sat still under the soft hum of the kettle. A habit-rich silence broken only by the click of his labeling gun. He pressed out a fresh strip of tape. House, title, 2008. It went on the latest manila folder, the corner tucked sharp beneath 3 others in a drawer he opened every morning. A simple thing, order, but it kept him level. The wedding invitation, clipped to the fridge door with a souvenir magnet, swayed in the draft from the air vent. Gold lettering, curled edges. Talia Tate and Bryce McCord, October 14th, Riverside Event Hall. He touched the corner, steadying it. Then he looked at the photo beside it, his late wife, Ruth, smiling beside a young Talia on the porch swing, a quilt over their laps. "One more day, Ruth," he said softly. His living room smelled faintly of lemon polish and warm metal. The kettle began to whistle. He reached for it but paused. Eyes drifting to the box of old mortgage papers stacked beside the radiator. For a second, it drew him back. Nights when he and Ruth worked double shifts just to pay down the note. He'd deliver mail by day, run appliances through his side hustle garage by night. Ruth worked at the school cafeteria and sewed between shifts. They hadn't traveled much, didn't throw parties, but they made that final payment 27 years in. He walked to the garage, switched on the overhead light. His tools buzzed to life in the quiet rhythm he liked best. 27 years, he muttered, hands brushing over a socket wrench. But it's ours. His cell phone rang just after 7. Talia, cheerful voice, slightly rushed. "Hey, Daddy, just checking in," she said, traffic noise buzzing behind her. "You still coming early, right? Bryce has a checklist. And, we'll need help setting up the guest book table." "I'll be there," Vernon said. Cool. Bryce is handling most of the financial stuff, so I'm staying out the weeds." She laughed. "I'll just sign where needed." That word stuck. She kept talking, something about the florist being late. Vernon made the usual sounds. When she hung up, he placed the phone face down on the table and looked out the kitchen window. There was an unease now, not loud, not urgent, but present. Vernon had met Bryce McCord twice before the engagement, a financial advisor with a sharp haircut and smoother delivery. 33, ambitious, talked a lot about asset optimization and long-term positioning. Nice car, overused cologne. Vernon remembered the handshake, warm but too quick, like the man needed to get on to someone more important. "Fine young man," neighbors had said after the engagement photo ran in the paper. Vernon had nodded. He always nodded before he was sure. The rehearsal dinner had been catered, formal but not stuffy. Long tables with gold chargers, wine on every setting. Vernon had worn the same gray suit he'd kept pressed since Ruth's funeral. Bryce gave a toast, of course. He talked about joining families, about the future. Then he slid into talk of opportunity. A home equity line of credit, or HELOC as he called it, was a modern tool, he said, for couples to start strong, pool assets, and build equity from day one. Vernon took a bite of chicken, let the silence stretch a beat too long, then said, "The house is already helping me by staying paid for." Forks clinked. A few polite chuckles. Talia touched her napkin, but didn't meet his eyes. Bryce smiled thinly, adjusted his cuff, and changed the subject. That night, Vernon sat at the kitchen table with the brochure Bryce had left. The language was slick. Graphs, smiling couples, a bold line in small print. Borrower must be on title. He underlined it. He reached for a sticky note and wrote 2 words. Questions. HELOC. He added the bank number from the brochure and stuck it beside the fridge thermostat. Above it, the wedding invitation shifted in the vent again. The next morning, Reverend Elijah Cole stopped by to go over the ceremony order. A calm man, early 50s, gray streak in his beard. He'd known Vernon and Ruth since before Talia was born. They sat in the living room, coffee mugs in hand. "You ready to speak?" Reverend asked. "I got a note card," Vernon said. "3 things I'll say. 3 I won't." "Good," Reverend nodded. "Boundaries don't mean bitterness." The coffee smelled stronger than usual. Reverend's coat carried the faint scent of old incense. "You worried?" the Reverend asked. Vernon looked toward the hall closet, where Ruth's sewing box sat untouched. "Not worried," he said. "Just noting things." When the Reverend left, Vernon took out his suit again and hung it on the bedroom door. A fresh shirt on the hanger, tie draped over the top. He walked to his desk drawer and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a folded note from Ruth. Faded handwriting, soft paper edges. The scent of her perfume had almost vanished, but not fully. He read it once, folded it back, and slipped it into the suit pocket. Outside, the sun was finally up. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started. Inside, the ticking clock resumed its quiet rhythm, and the day before, the wedding moved quietly on. Riverside Event Hall stood polished and bright, with gold trim along the archways and soft music filling the gaps between footsteps. Vernon Tate arrived early, same as always. He'd parked in the far corner of the lot and walked in through the service entrance, holding a garment bag in one hand and a folding chair in the other. He wasn't part of the staff, but helping was second nature. Inside, round tables were already draped in white linen. Young workers in black uniforms arranged place cards and adjusted votive candles. Vernon eased into motion, moving a stray chair, aligning it with the rest. "Sir?" a voice called. Bryce's mother, Diane McCord, approached, heels clicking fast. She smiled, thin and practiced. "The staff has it covered. Why don't you relax before guests arrive?" Vernon straightened up. "Of course." He stepped aside, nodding once. Her perfume lingered as she turned. He sat near the back row of pew-style chairs lining the aisle. Laughter rose from a group near the stage. Glasses clinked at the bar. Vernon didn't join in. "I'll just stay out the way," he said under his breath. 10 minutes before the ceremony, he found Talia behind the curtain near the dressing rooms. She was in her dress, hair pinned up, phone in one hand. She smiled when she saw him, then hesitated. "I got something for you," he said. From inside his coat pocket, he pulled a small wooden box. No ribbon, just polished grain and a metal clasp. She opened it slowly. Inside, a folded card in Ruth's handwriting. The paper was aged, but clean. Just one sentence. "This home means you'll always have a place to return." Talia's fingers hovered over it. Her eyes warmed, then flickered. She glanced toward the hallway. "I found it in your mother's keepsake drawer," Vernon said. "She always meant to give it to you herself." Talia said nothing. A sharp scent of champagne floated in from the main room. "Mama still speaks soft," Vernon added, barely above a whisper. Behind him, footsteps approached. Bryce McCord stepped in, tux jacket unbuttoned, phone in hand, his voice lowered, but Vernon heard it. "See? He'll never see you as grown." Talia didn't answer. Her smile faded as the ceremony music started to swell. Bryce took her hand and led her out. Cameras were already rolling. The ceremony passed without drama. Vows were read. Hands were held. Reverend Cole guided them through it with quiet authority. When the guests stood to applaud, Vernon clapped once, then folded his hands in his lap. At the reception, speeches began. Diane spoke first, followed by Bryce's brother. Then Bryce took the microphone. "We're building something strong," he said, "and starting with smart decisions, shared finances, leveraged equity, and long-term value for our future family." Vernon watched as eyes turned toward him. Bryce smiled. "We've talked about optimizing family assets to keep pace with life's demands." Vernon stood. "The house is already paid for," he said. "Clear. Even." The microphone buzzed slightly. Bryce sipped his wine, gave a thin smile, and lifted his glass. "To progress," he said. The room followed. Talia sat between them, quiet. Later, she noticed guests whispering. A woman near the cake table held up her phone. The camera blinked red. Talia shifted in her chair. Bryce leaned in again. "You always let him decide," he murmured, brushing her hand aside as she reached for her fork. "Not this time." The flash went off. Someone laughed. A waiter passed too close, setting down another bottle. Talia stared at the wooden box resting on the gift table. The corner of the card peeked out. Then she looked at Vernon. He stood, arms at his sides, still and quiet. "Now or never," Bryce whispered. She rose. Her glass was half full. The wine flew before she knew she'd released it. Red streak across Vernon's collar, a chorus of gasps. The band stopped playing mid-note. Vernon didn't flinch. He reached for his napkin, wiped his face, then folded it once. "It's your day, baby," he said calmly. "I won't argue. Tomorrow I do my work." He set the napkin on the table and turned. Reverend Cole met him near the aisle. Guests shifted. Phones came up. The Reverend placed a hand gently on Vernon's shoulder. "Keep your back straight," he said low. "The seal will speak for you." Vernon nodded. He walked out of the hall without another word. His shoes squeaked once against the floor, then faded. In the restroom, Talia scrubbed at her sleeve. The wine stain only widened, turning the fabric darker. She looked up. Her reflection didn't feel familiar. Eyes smudged, hair slipping out of place. She whispered, "What have I done?" The faucet hissed. Behind the door, the music had resumed, but quieter. Bryce appeared soon after, arm already out. "Smile, babe," he said. "They're watching." Talia walked with him back into the crowd. She smiled, barely. Her lips moved, but her eyes stayed cold. A guest raised a phone. The shutter clicked. Another tagged the couple and the venue online. Outside, Vernon's car moved steadily through light rain. The windshield wipers beat in a slow rhythm. On the dashboard, a voicemail alert blinked. Unknown number. Loan processing. He didn't press play. The sound of the rain filled the car. His fingers rested lightly on the steering wheel. His phone lit again, this time a text from Reverend Cole. "Tomorrow don't call. Write. Paper keeps you breathing." Vernon nodded once, even though no one could see. Home waited, and so did the work. The morning came early. Vernon hadn't slept much, but he was already up before the light had fully touched the blinds. The suit from last night still hung on the back of the bedroom door. He didn't need to touch it to remember. The collar was stiff with dried wine. On the sleeve, a few small beads of red still clung to the fabric. He could smell the faint sting of champagne mixed with starch. He didn't look long. He straightened the chair at the kitchen table, flipped open a new notebook, and uncapped a pen. The old kitchen clock ticked above him. The kettle hissed behind his shoulder. "Start with paper, end with peace," he said to himself. He opened his laptop and began typing. Notice of non-consent and revocation of authorization. Regarding HELOC or any secured credit against 118 Coltrane Avenue. His hands moved slow but steady. HELOC, home equity line of credit, meant any loan that tried to use his home as collateral. He knew that much. The phrasing of the letter slowed him down. Legal words had a rhythm that didn't match his own, but he pushed through. He added one more line. "Please confirm in writing that no credit inquiry or lien process will be pursued using my property." He checked the grammar 3 times, saved a copy, printed 2. The smell of toner and heat filled the kitchen for a few seconds. He placed the letter in an envelope, sealed it. Then he looked at the photo of Ruth on the fridge and whispered something quiet in Vietnamese. "Giai tu la kach toi gu bin ting." Paper keeps me calm. At the post office, he stood in line behind a man sending off birthday cards and a woman returning a package. When it was his turn, Vernon slid the envelope across the counter. "Certified mail," he said, "with tracking." The clerk nodded, stamped it with practiced hands. The red ink spread in a solid line across the corner. "Certified mail, Ya 4723. "Copy of receipt?" the clerk asked. "Yes," Vernon said. "Barcode stays with me." He took the receipt, folded it once, and slipped it into the folder labeled House, Title, 2008. Then he peeled off a fresh label and added it to a new folder, House, Fraud Prevention. Back at home, he sat down with the folder open in front of him. Page 1, a short timeline of events. Page 2, a copy of the receipt. He dated everything in his usual format, clear and tight. His hands paused when he reached the note card from Ruth. For a second, the memory of Talia's face, the moment the wine left her hand, came back. Her eyes, wide, shocked, stubborn. He breathed once, then kept writing. A knock came at the door around 9. It was Deidre Lomax, coffee in one hand, her laptop bag in the other. Deidre was in her early 40s, a sharp-eyed real estate broker who'd once referred Bryce McCord to clients. Now she was trying to make things right. "Morning," she said, stepping in. "Coffee's hot." Vernon pointed her to the dining table. "Clip hit 20,000 views," she said, opening her laptop. "Folks don't forget a thrown drink." He didn't respond. She logged into her title records portal and docked her keyboard. "You don't need sympathy, Vern," she said. "You need a title search." The room was quiet except for the fan from her laptop and the distant hum of a lawn trimmer 2 houses down. A few clicks later, Deidre found it. An application in process, not on the public deed yet, but visible in the partner-lender system. "Code LX1097, she said. "Timestamp says 09:42 a.m. yesterday." She hit print. The printer in her bag chugged softly, pushing out the sheet. She highlighted the code and date. "This isn't ownership yet," she said. "It's a pre-closing signal, but it's moving." Vernon took the page and studied it. Then he photographed it with his phone, saved it under a folder marked House Evidence. "We log before we accuse," he said simply. He and Deidre drove to the county building an hour later. The property fraud alert desk was tucked behind the records counter. Vernon enrolled both email and text notifications for any filings on his parcel. "It won't block changes," the clerk explained, "but it'll warn you." "Peace costs more," Vernon replied. "Enroll both." The clerk stamped 2 forms. The echo of the printer finished the job. Outside, it had started to drizzle. Cars rolled by slow on the wet street. Reverend Cole stood near the corner, umbrella folded under his arm. "Just finished," Vernon said. "You holding up?" Cole asked. "Doing the work." Reverend studied his face. Don't let paperwork replace apology. Vernon looked out across the parking lot, eyes narrowed. When you speak, Cole added, make it count. At home, Vernon stood at the kitchen window as rain tapped lightly on the glass. He picked up his phone, opened the messaging app, and typed a short sentence. When you're ready to tell the truth, I'm home. He didn't send it. The phone buzzed. Missed call from Talia. No voicemail this time. He didn't redial. He opened the binder one last time. 2 tabs filled. A 3rd tab waited, still empty. He slid the unsent message between the pages, for now. The window pane fogged a little. The rain continued. The next part hadn't come yet, but the table was set. 1 week after the wedding, Vernon was back in his kitchen with his binder open and the window cracked for air. He'd kept the routine. Morning coffee, kettle whistling, pages updated with every new step. The call came just after 9. Vern, it's Deidre, she said, voice focused. I tracked down the lender tied to that LX 1097 code. Vernon sat up straighter. They've issued a pre-closing package, she continued. Attached a notary request. Your daughter's listed as co-applicant, and your number is listed as backup contact. He heard her keyboard clicking. Deidre didn't pause often unless it mattered. It's a HELOC again, home equity line of credit, same lender as before. But they still don't have title holder consent. Vernon looked over at the labeled folder. His hand rested on it, steady now. Send me what you've got, he said. I'll log it. He printed the documents Deidre sent, 2 copies, each stapled at the upper left. He marked the date in red ink at the top right corner, OCT 21. The pages trembled slightly as he handled them, but his grip adjusted. Print 2, staple left corner, he said aloud. Record never lies. At a condo across town, Talia opened an email from Loan Processing Dept. It had instructions to bring primary ID and, if applicable, a marriage certificate. She read the message twice, heart racing a little, not from fear, but importance. They were talking to her directly, not Bryce, not her father. She forwarded it with a short note. They just need signatures, right? The reply came quickly. Bryce was already in the car. Same-day notarization, he said, pulling on his jacket. His knuckles whitened against the steering wheel as he changed lanes. It's routine, baby. Everyone does it. Talia watched him from the passenger seat. He seemed tense. The turn signal clicked steadily as he sped through the next light. At the notary's office, everything slowed. Fluorescent lights buzzed above a clean desk. The notary, a calm woman with reading glasses, scrolled through the deed on screen. She looked up. Property is titled solely to Vernon Tate, she said. Without his signature, I cannot authenticate this transaction. The room held still. Bryce didn't speak at first. His jaw tightened. He uncapped the pen he'd been holding, then clicked it shut again. Chain of title is clear, the notary said, looking at Talia now. But he's not here. Talia blinked. Her heart moved faster than her thoughts. Shame moved in fast, without permission. She looked at Bryce. Why didn't you say Dad had to sign? We'll fix it later, he whispered, sharp. Blood rushed in her ears. The room felt louder, even as everyone stayed quiet. I thought this was our future, she said, barely above a whisper. Not his signature. Bryce looked away. Back at his attorney's office, Vernon sat with a copy of the Revocable Living Trust in front of him. The lawyer, a calm woman in her 50s, explained each section with clarity. This lets you remain trustee, she said. It bars new loans unless authorized in writing by you. Vernon nodded. Add a clause, he said. No third party may mortgage or pledge without written trustee consent. She made the change. He signed slowly, deliberately, the seal pressed clean into the paper. Deidre arrived shortly after with a printed copy of Bryce's broker check file. The regulator notice was marked under review. Bryce's license had been flagged. She laid it on the table between them. "Some of this is confidential," she said, covering client names with sticky notes. "But the public notice stands." Vernon read it, then folded it once. "He's not evil," Deidre said quietly. "Just desperate, and that's worse with money." The call came that evening. Bryce's voice was warm, too smooth. "I only wanted to secure Talia's future," he said. "This was never meant to hurt anybody." Vernon sat at his dining table. Deidre was across from him, speakerphone on. "Then write it down," Vernon said. There was a pause. Static clicked. Then the line went dead. At 9:18 p.m., Vernon's phone chimed. Subject: title modification attempt flagged. He opened his binder, flipped to the timeline sheet, and logged the alert. "That's one boundary signed in ink," he said quietly. The next morning, he stood on the courthouse steps with Reverend Cole. Inside, the trust was officially filed. His name remained on every line that mattered. "You all right?" Reverend asked. "Paperwork's done," Vernon said. "But it's quiet." "Justice doesn't need volume," Reverend replied, smiling. Vernon didn't say much. Noon bells rang behind them. That evening, he sat on his porch. The sun was low. His folder was open on his lap. Every document had its place: the certified mail receipt, the trust copy, the broker check notice, the fraud alert. His phone buzzed. A new message. "We'd like to hear your side, local radio." He looked at the envelope beside him. He'd already begun sorting what to send. A breeze lifted one of the pages. The ink caught the last of the light. Inside, the binder now held more than records. It held the story he refused to argue about. Next would come the telling, but in his own way, on his terms. Vernon picked up the phone the next morning. The message from the local station had been short. "We'd like to hear your side." He called their number just after 9 a.m. A young-sounding producer answered. "Mr. Tate, thanks for getting back to us. We'd love to have you on to talk about the story behind that wedding clip." Vernon cleared his throat. "I'll speak about the timeline, the paper trail, dates, documents, what happened, not what people felt." There was a pause. "We'd hoped for something with a little more emotion." Vernon didn't shift. "I'm not here for opinion, just facts." He heard the low static of a test mic in the background. "Dates and documents," he repeated. "That's what I'll share." The producer agreed to a short, pre-recorded segment. Vernon asked for no live callers, no speculation. At home, he opened the binder on the kitchen table. The same pages were still there: certified mail receipt, copy of the trust, broker check printout, county fraud alert. He arranged them in a fresh stack. The paper rustled as he flipped each tab. Midway through, he paused. A photo on the fridge caught his eye. Talia, smiling on the porch years ago, holding a birthday balloon. That smile had looked real then. He breathed out, slow. He picked up a pen and wrote on a yellow sticky note. "Speak without anger." He placed it on the front page. The studio was smaller than he expected. Just 2 chairs, a console, and a red light above the sound booth. The host shook his hand and offered water. They ran a quick test on the mic. "You nervous?" the host asked. "Not for this." "You sure? We're leading the segment with your voice." Vernon nodded. The light blinked on. The host gave a short intro. A retired postal supervisor learned the power of documentation when his home nearly became collateral without consent. "Mr. Vernon Tate, welcome." Vernon looked into the mic. The glare of the studio lights pressed against his eyes. His throat tightened for a second. Then he began. "I sent a letter. I got a receipt. And that receipt saved my home. He laid out the events, the certified letter, the binder entries, the title alert. His voice didn't shake. He didn't name names. He never said daughter or son-in-law. He explained the property fraud alert system next. It's a county service, he said. Free or paid, depending where you live. You register your parcel ID, and they notify you if someone tries to file against your deed. The host leaned in. Are you recommending it? Vernon paused. No promotion, he said. Just protection. Behind the glass, the producer logged the segment. The keyboard clicked with every detail. They reached the final question. Mr. Tate, the host asked, do you believe in forgiveness? The air conditioner hummed above them. Vernon didn't answer right away. Forgiveness needs boundaries first, he said at last. The room went quiet. On the board, a phone line blinked, audience requests starting to queue up. The clip aired that afternoon. It was trimmed to under 5 minutes. Still, the impact spread fast. People online started calling him the quiet father. The comments rolled in, supportive, respectful. A few reached too far. One site requested an exclusive. Another offered to produce a docuseries. Vernon deleted both emails. His phone buzzed for hours. He silenced it, then placed it in a drawer. Talia heard the replay at school. The lunchroom was loud, trays clattering, kids talking. Someone had a radio app playing on a tablet at the teacher's table. The moment came quickly, her father's voice, clear and calm. That receipt saved my home. Whispers followed. One teacher glanced over. Another tapped her phone screen, whispering a name. Talia excused herself and walked to the parking lot. She sat in the car and let the heat settle in. Then she cried, quietly, eyes forward, no sound. Across town, Bryce was in his brokerage office when a letter slid under his door. Subject, FINRA inquiry. Immediate response required. He opened it alone. The letter was from the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA. They were requesting documentation, communication records, full timeline disclosure. He didn't tell Talia. Instead, he sent one text to Deidre. You made this happen. At her office, Deidre read it without blinking. She took a screenshot, filed it under a harassment flag. Then she stood, locked her door, and inserted a flash drive into her desktop. She labeled the folder, Broker, Proof. The USB clicked into place. Her hand hovered over the mouse for a second. Then she copied everything. That Sunday, Reverend Cole spoke at service. He didn't mention Vernon by name, but the message was unmistakable. Some things are handled quietly, he said, and sometimes silence preaches louder than noise. There were murmurs in the pews. A few heads turned, a few nodded. Vernon sat near the back. He kept his hands folded. He didn't speak to anyone on his way out. That night his phone rang again. The name on the screen, Talia. He let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Daddy, she said, voice quiet. He waited. I heard the broadcast. He still said nothing. I was wrong, she continued, but I don't know where to start. He spoke soft and slow. You don't owe me sorry, he said. You owe yourself truth. Rain tapped lightly on the roof. Neither of them hung up right away. Later, Vernon sat alone in the living room. The radio replayed his segment one more time. He didn't move. The kettle started whistling again. An email alert blinked on his laptop. Subject, FINRA hearing scheduled, Bryce McCord, Nov 17. He added the date to his binder. Then he closed the cover for the night. 1 month after the radio broadcast, Vernon found a large envelope in his mailbox. The return address read, FINRA, Enforcement Division. He carried it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and opened it carefully with a letter opener he hadn't used in years. Inside was a formal request. He was not being charged, not called to defend anything, but they needed his documents, his binder timeline, certified mail receipt, trust paperwork, broker check printout. They were calling it background evidence for an ongoing inquiry. Vernon held the letter a moment longer. He didn't like courtrooms, didn't like being tied to conflict. But this wasn't argument, it was record keeping, and his part was already written. He nodded once to himself and picked up the phone to confirm receipt. The next day, Talia showed up unannounced. It had rained all morning. Her hair was damp, and she carried a folder in one hand. Inside was a printed copy of the email she'd received weeks ago from the loan processing department, the one that listed her as co-applicant and named Vernon as the backup contact. She stood on the porch a long second before knocking. When Vernon opened the door, he looked at her but didn't speak. She didn't reach for a hug. He stepped aside. She entered slowly. The floorboards creaked. She stood in the middle of the living room, unsure of where to sit. The binder was on the table, closed but visible. He pointed toward the chair. "Sit down," he said. "We'll start with paper." They went through the email together, line by line. She read aloud the section that confirmed her role in the application. Vernon didn't interrupt. When she reached the part that listed his number, her voice slowed. "I thought it was just standard. I didn't know they used you like that." He nodded once, then passed her a blank affidavit form. "We file your truth too," he said. Talia picked up the pen. Her hand shook slightly, but the pen moved. Outside, the rain kept a steady pace on the windows. The hearing was held in a government building downtown. Nothing dramatic, just a long table, 3 FINRA officers, a clerk with a laptop, and a small stack of water bottles. Bryce McCord arrived alone. He wore a tailored suit and carried a leather briefcase. No attorney, no assistant. He greeted the room with a smile that stayed just a few seconds too long. He thought charm might work. The examiners asked him to sit. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. One of the panelists tapped a pen in quiet rhythm. Deidre Lomax arrived next. She greeted the clerk, then handed over a sealed envelope and a flash drive. "This contains timeline documentation, email trails, and a PDF of the broker check notice," she said. Her tone was even. Bryce looked at her, then narrowed his eyes slightly. She didn't look away. "Everything I've said is verifiable," she added. The clerk inserted the USB. The soft click echoed. Vernon entered with a small messenger bag. His binder was inside, zipped in tight. When they called his name, he stood, nodded once, and placed it on the table. The examiner opened it slowly. Page 1 was the timeline. Page 2, the certified mail receipt. Each page was labeled, stamped, clean. "Each page has a date stamp," Vernon said. "Nothing else to add." The examiner flipped through in silence. The pages made a soft, brushing sound. Then the questions turned to Bryce. He called the matter a family misunderstanding. He said his goal was to secure the household for the future. When they asked about the notarization attempt, he paused. One examiner held up the blank notary record. "No owner signature," the examiner said. "Chain of title incomplete." The panel noted the incident as attempted misrepresentation. Bryce shifted in his seat. He adjusted his collar. Sweat marked the inside edge of one cuff. He tried again. "I just wanted to leverage an asset. I didn't mean—" He stopped. The room waited. He dropped his gaze and spoke again. "I was wrong." The panel gave no reaction. One simply scribbled something on the report sheet. Then came Talia. She stood beside the clerk and held a small note in her hand. She read it softly. "I was complicit by silence. I should have asked questions. I didn't." Her voice shook slightly, but she got through it. She folded the paper and looked down. One examiner nodded and added it to the record. The panel excused everyone. 15 minutes later, the clerk returned with the official verdict. Formal reprimand and immediate suspension of license for Mr. Bryce McCord. No outburst, no argument, just the sound of the printer finishing the notice. Back home that evening, Vernon pulled the fraud prevention binder from the shelf. He sat at the kitchen table. The house was quiet. Talia had gone home already. He turned to the final tab. He filed the FINRA decision, closed page behind the others. Then he closed the binder and tapped the cover once with his fingers. Paper did its job, he said. The drawer closed with a soft thunk. Later that evening, he watered the plants on the porch. The sun had started to drop. Talia stepped out beside him. She hadn't spoken much since the hearing. She looked at him. Years of distance still hung between them, but something had moved. "Can we start over?" she asked. "With Truth as trustee?" He looked at her. "Truth don't need a co-signer," he said, smiling faintly. The hose gave off a soft stream against the soil. In the yard, the cicadas began their chorus. The next morning, Vernon made breakfast the way he always had. Quiet, deliberate, each motion unspoken. Bacon in the skillet, eggs in the pan, 2 slices of toast warming. Talia sat at the table, hands folded, her eyes moving slowly across the same room where she'd grown up. He poured her coffee first. She blinked, looked down, then wrapped her hands around the mug. "We start with breakfast," he said, "not the past." The bacon sizzled. Their plates clinked lightly on the table. Neither reached for big words, but something loosened. Later that week, they drove to the Shelby County Register's office. Together. Vernon carried the binder. Talia held a manila folder with her affidavit and proof of separation from Bryce's accounts. The clerk at the counter skimmed their paperwork and looked up. "Would you like to file a power of attorney to simplify future access?" Vernon shook his head once. "No signatures between us, but love." The clerk raised her eyebrows, tapped her pen twice on the counter, and pressed print. At the attorney's office the next day, Vernon added an amendment to the Revocable Living Trust. The language was clear. Beneficiary retains right of residence. Trustee retains control. Talia sat quietly across the desk. When the lawyer slid the document over for Vernon's signature, she hesitated. "I don't know if I've earned this," she said. Vernon didn't answer immediately. He signed his name with slow, even strokes, then looked up. "You'll live here if you need," he said. "But the deed listens to paper, not pressure." The lawyer nodded. The pen moved again. Meanwhile, Talia had started seeing a debt counselor at a nonprofit legal clinic. She brought a box of folders, credit cards, student loans, car payments, half of them still tied to Bryce's name. When the counselor pointed out a lingering joint line of credit, she exhaled hard and signed the release. "One name gone," she said. "One name clean." The phone dinged as the system confirmed the update. The counselor handed her a copy. Weeks passed. Bryce's FINRA suspension hit the business news section. Small articles, cold sentences. His former clients began to withdraw funds. A former co-worker leaked a quote. "He's being reviewed for breach of fiduciary duty." Talia saw his name in a headline and felt nothing. She opened her contacts list, pressed delete. The phone made a small tone. She didn't look back. On Sunday, Reverend Cole caught Vernon after service. They stood beside the side exit, near the wooden coat rack. "You filed what mattered," the Reverend said, voice low. "Even quiet records preach." Some of the congregation whispered, not loud, just audible. Vernon glanced toward them, then back to Cole. "They can talk," he said. "I file peace, not pride. The pew creaked behind them. A hymn played faintly in the background. Neither moved. Deidre came by midweek. She met Vernon at the same kitchen table where most of the past month's paperwork had lived. She handed him a sealed envelope. "My resignation," she said. "From the brokerage." He raised an eyebrow. "Career still matters," he said. "I know," she replied, "but this is my restitution. We all sign our lessons." He didn't try to stop her. She nodded once, turned, and left. Later that day, Vernon noticed his neighbor's mailbox leaning forward at a strange angle. The metal hinge had rusted, one side bent almost completely off. He went back inside, grabbed his toolkit, and returned. It took 40 minutes. The screws didn't want to move. The wind picked up slightly, but he kept working. When it finally straightened out, he stepped back and looked at it. "Even metal learns patience," he muttered, brushing off his hands. Meanwhile, Talia had started volunteering at a local housing clinic. She gave short workshops on title protection and the HUD-1 form, a federal document listing all mortgage-related costs. Her first time speaking, her hands trembled slightly. She cleared her throat, found a rhythm, and explained in plain terms how people lost their homes without ever knowing they'd signed the risk. A woman in the back row raised her hand and said, "I didn't even know my husband's name was the only one on the deed." Talia nodded. "Then today's a good day to learn," she said. The crowd murmured their approval. Toward the end of summer, the radio host called again. "We're doing a 1 year later series," he said. "You and your daughter were our most requested follow-up." Vernon paused. He asked Talia. She hesitated, then agreed. "Truth ages well when filed properly," Vernon said. "We'll go." At the studio, they were seated across from the same host, same red on-air light overhead. The intro music faded. The host cleared his throat. "Back in spring," he said, "this father and daughter taught us about paperwork, trust, and how silence can crack families wide open. We're here for an update." Talia's hands rested on her knees. "I mistook control for care," she said. Her voice cracked. She paused, breathed. "I thought pushing forward meant leading. I didn't ask questions. I just signed things." The host nodded, looked to Vernon. He leaned forward slightly. "I never lost a daughter," he said. "Just misplaced her for a while." There was a long silence, then soft applause. After the show, they stepped out into the morning sun. Birds chirped near the parking lot. Car engines hummed past the studio. There was no tension in the air. Later that night, Vernon opened his binder one last time. He added a note to the front tab. "House, peace executed." He closed it slowly, set it on the shelf. The lamp behind him glowed steady. The small room at the East Memphis Public Library held 24 folding chairs, one upright mic stand, and a table with 3 binders, one of them Vernon Tate's. He stood behind the podium, suit pressed, tie modest. "I'm no lawyer," he said, adjusting his notes. "Just a man who read the fine print." A quiet chuckle spread across the room. The mic squeaked as he shifted. He smiled briefly, then began. Behind him, a glass case displayed the materials: his revocable trust, the original certified mail receipt, the county fraud alert registration, and a printout from the broker check report. Taped neatly beneath it, a handwritten sign read, "Paper is memory with edges." He hadn't wanted the exhibit, said it felt like bragging. But when the librarian told him people were asking for copies, he wrote the label himself. Afterward, a city official shook his hand and handed him a card. "We're starting a fraud prevention program for seniors. You'd be perfect to lead a few sessions." "I'm no teacher," Vernon replied. "Then just read out loud," the official smiled. He looked at the card, then slipped it into his shirt pocket. Maybe I will. Meanwhile, Talia had settled into her new role, managing a small housing literacy fund. She used her story, carefully edited, to teach young renters and first-time buyers about HUD-1 disclosures, lien releases, and what not to sign under pressure. She didn't hide the wedding clip. It had gone viral and stayed that way. People still recognized her sometimes. She kept it online anyway. Transparency felt like restitution now. Across town, Deidre Lomax had left the brokerage for good and opened a small consulting firm focused on ethical title management. Her logo was plain. Her forms were clean. Vernon had insisted on being her first client. No commission, she'd told him. Then call it trust, he said. At Greater South Baptist, Reverend Cole gave a sermon on stewardship. Some guard what's valuable, he said. Others guard what's right. He never mentioned names, but Vernon sat a little straighter. A few heads turned his way. He adjusted his tie, eyes on the pulpit. Back home, Vernon spent a Saturday morning fixing the mailbox again. This time, he wasn't replacing it, just polishing the old brass plaque. The words had faded over the years. He etched in a new line below the original, Tate House, established 1993. The Polish resisted at first. Old grime held firm. He paused, pressed harder, then stopped. Some stains belong, he said aloud. They tell the story. Later that evening, the sound of a wind chime rang from down the block. A cicada started its call. Dusk settled in. He paused mid-motion, bristle brush in hand. Kept us steady even now, Ruth, he whispered. That same night, the local radio station replayed a clip from last year's interview. Forgiveness needs boundaries first. Vernon sat alone in his living room. Binder back on the shelf, lamp low. This time, the words didn't sting. They sounded like something he'd teach. At the fence the next morning, Jamal, the teenager from 3 doors down, stopped his bike and asked, "Mr. Tate, what's a trust?" Vernon chuckled. He leaned on the railing. "It's a promise you write down," he said, "so you can keep it." Jamal nodded slowly, rode off. The porch light hummed behind Vernon's head. Inside, Vernon sat at the same kitchen table, unfolded a sheet of stationery, and began to write. To Talia, open after my 100th birthday. No legal terms, no account numbers, just a note in slow, steady handwriting. You are more than your name on paper, but keep the paper anyway. It reminds you who you were when you forgot. He folded it neatly, sealed it in a labeled envelope, set it in the back of the binder, tab 9. That evening, the camera would drift gently across his living room wall. One photo showed Ruth in the garden, wide sun hat tilted. Another was of Talia at the radio station, speaking carefully into the mic. Next to it, a close-up of the mailbox, brass polished, words crisp. A final frame captured Vernon's back as he held a folder under his arm, porch light catching the white label. House, peace executed. He turned off the lamp. Cicadas sang louder, and night, at last, came quiet. The end. What would you have done if you were Vernon, blindsided at your own daughter's wedding, tested without warning, left to fight for the house you built by hand? Would you stay silent or start documenting everything? If you've ever had to protect what mattered, a home, your peace, or even your name, drop your story in the comments. You're not alone. Please comment 1 if you liked the video, comment 0 if you didn't, and feel free to share why, so I can keep improving the content for you. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Your support means more than you know.